load that stuff.
Yeah.
What do you mean the next day?
Well, Pat got the car washed on Monday, came to the office on Tuesday, and the moment we hit the parking lot,
I know.
it was on the car.
Well, I left my phone laying in the seat of my car. When I went in to go to the bathroom and came back and it was covered.
Yeah.
About the way with all that yellow dust flying in the air.
They were just talking about it. It covered just walking in.
Yeah, like I say, I've been out here, just two buckets, you know, boy, I mean, it doesn't, it all doesn't do no good, like they say, 2 or 3 hours later. I can look on my roof, north and south, looks real good. East and west, all got some east and west, I mean, it was so different, you know, same roof, same tin on top. But this looks, you know, almost new, this looks like, having to get this for all the film, you know.
No, Margaret. That's that.
He wants you with him.
Keep the Donna sitting there at the computer.
I was going there.
Good morning.
Poinsettia, Lily. Okay. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.
Saved my man, I'm pretty good shape.
You won 2 games now.
Makes it easy.
Oh, yes, it does.
That's what I'm worried about, my good thing going out.
I'll get that when we start.
I noticed you walk about like I do, and I don't be hurting or nothing.
Yeah, well, I just can't walk.
I know a way to fix that.
Surgery.
My doctor said just cut it off.
I wouldn't go that far.
Then you ain't going nowhere,
No, actually, the surgery was quite easy.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, I mean, they did it, and you go home that day, but first they make sure you can walk, and they started physical therapy within 4 days. So 2 weeks, basically 2 weeks of physical therapy at home. I mean, I can get up and walk within a couple of days without an issue. You just have to make sure you've got a good, solid couch
And it's gonna get.
or a power recliner, because you gotta be able to get up,
Yeah.
and you can't use that one knee to push up on for a little while.
Yeah.
That was the only issue I had.
Okay.
Other than that, no. I mean, by Christmas Day, I was walking without the walker.
You have much pain?
No, that was the nice part. I would get I'm different. I would get tinges here and there, but mainly the pain was post-op, where the attachments were made. Well, the incision itchy.
Oh.
Itchy. And the bandages rubbed me raw. That was it.
Well, when Chris had her operation the 31st, she's going home that day. They don't keep you.
Nope.
They just send you home.
Nope, they don't. It's outpatient now. Okay, it's 10 o'clock. Kay and Wayman won't be here. They're picking up their daughter. Phyllis won't be here, and I'll fill us in on that one in a minute. And Julie won't be here. So, pretty much everyone's here. JP is still in the hospital. He's got a bacterial infection, plus he also has cellulitis. So that's what's causing some complications there. They're hoping that they can get the antibiotics to start working. Otherwise, they got to go in and clean things up. So,
And if you want to see Jerry Thunder, you better know the room number. I went out there Monday morning
Okay.
at 9:30. They told me he was not there.
room number is 3320. Okay, 3320. And he's always there. He's not under an ice, rendition program or anything like that.
But I got there Monday morning at 9:30. They told me he wasn't there.
Yeah, no, he's there. He's there. So. Okay, let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, once again, we delve into the book of Luke. Lord, as you tell us the story of Jesus through Luke, remind us that we're like the centurion. We are unworthy to have Christ come to us, but Christ comes to us joyfully and willingly to save us and give us life everlasting. In your son's name we pray to you. Amen. Okay, getting into chapter 7. We have not gotten into this one in our readings in Scripture yet. We will see some of this summer. This summer is the parables and miracles, so we'll see that. Okay, it begins with the word century means a period of 100 years. In ancient Rome, a century was also the name for a military unit made up of 100 soldiers. What title did the captain of such a unit bear? Okay, why does he say captain? For a single reason. In the military, especially the Army and the Marines, 100 men is typically a company, and a captain is the commander of a company. And captain is the highest of what's called the company grade rates, or ranks. Captain, first lieutenant, second lieutenant. Okay, once you go above that, that's major. But a company commander is a captain. What did the Romans call that captain? Centurion, because he was leading 100 men. It was that simple. Centurion is a leader of 100 men. A company would usually be 3 platoons, broken down about 30 each, because you've got the company commander, you've got his deputy commander, and then you've got 2 platoon leaders. Right there, you got 4 people. So, it would be broken down approximately 30 each, because then you got staff folks and things like that. So it would rank out about 30 guys, 3 platoons, 10 people, or they would break it up in some way. So whatever. 5 of 6, 6 of 5, whatever. Why do you suppose this man sent a committee of prominent Jews to Jesus instead of going himself?
Was he afraid he was a Roman, and was he afraid Jesus might not receive him? And also, he was used to telling somebody to run.
Correct. Correct. Couple different things going on here. One, he's a Gentile. He's a Roman. Okay. A company commander, 9 times out of 10, was probably going to be an Italian soldier. You weren't going to put an indigenous conscript in charge of a company. Well, you don't do that. Okay. One, that you don't trust him. Okay. But so most likely he's a Roman soldier. So it automatically makes him a Gentile. He's not born of a Jew, so he's a Gentile. And he's been there a little while, so he knows the customs and the religious customs. In order to be a good commander, what do you learn to do? You find out about the area you're in. In the Army, they have what's called civil affairs. I can't remember, but they're called civil affairs units. Back when Iraq was going on in the early 2000s, all the civil affairs units were over there, reserve and active, because they were the ones that interfaced with the locals. They talked to them. They found out what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, where you should go, where you shouldn't go, how to behave, and then they would come back and brief the company commanders and the battalion commanders and all this stuff, so that everyone knew how they were supposed to be behaving. But a Roman captain in those days, he had to be his own civil affairs guy, learning what the Jewish customs were, what you did do, what you didn't do, what you were allowed to do. You just didn't come in and push everyone around. When you did that, you ended up having bad relations, and the last thing Pilate wanted was more bad relations. He did enough. Okay? Pilate did enough for bad relations. The soldiers wanted to keep a very steady peace. Don't agitate, don't cause problems, keep a steady peace. So he knew that a Gentile approaching a Jew was not the best thing to do, especially a rabbi who is prominent as Jesus. Let us remember, he very quickly became prominent. Why?
Because of his message and the miracles he had been doing.
Because of his teachings of what he had accomplished. Exactly. you know, very early on, he's at Peter's house, and they bring a sick person to Peter to heal. I mean, this is very early in his ministry. They had already heard what he'd been doing, so they knew that they should bring him to Jesus. So he's cognizant of this. He doesn't want to accept the apple cart. Plus, as Miss Arlene said, he's used to giving orders. Okay, companies on their own. Commander's used to people listening to him and doing what he tells them. Yeah.
I always felt or thought that the centurion was almost equivalent to a gladiator.
No.
He was a tough cookie.
Well, he's a tough cookie. He's been up the ranks. It wasn't like the Civil War generals who were the landed gentry and bought their way in. No, he typically had fought his way up, not like a gladiator, but he had worked his way up. He'd been in the ranks. He knew what was what.
When I say gladiator, I mean, this wasn't something new to him,
No.
killing people.
No. And he knew how to fight. He knew how to lead. So yeah, right. So, you know, he's very careful. He has some Jewish, how does he put it?
He had made a really good
Yes.
reputation for himself because the Jews said he was, told Jesus he was a good man.
Yes, and the elders trusted him. Okay, which means he was a smart leader. You don't agitate where you don't need to agitate. You make friends where you need to make friends. Not to get things, but to make your job easier. Okay, I'm not going to get into what we've done lately with our foreign aid budget, but one of the reasons we did foreign aid was to make friends in other places so that we didn't have to go there. That was the whole point. Okay, what did the Jews say of him? As Arlene already related that. They said, he's worthy to have you do this for him. He loves our nation. He's the one who built us our synagogue. Notice that. He's the one that built us our synagogue. When I was in the Guard, we went down to Panama in '92. This is post-Noriega. And this is one of the ways of trying to help Panama get back up on its feet. Our job, it was to rebuild clinics, schools, dorms, refurbish schools. Have you ever seen pictures of foreign countries and the wiring on the poles? They're rat's nests. You know, take a look at our poles. See how organized the poles are. Wires come here, wires go there, wires snake down here, but they look organized. These poles in Panama were rat's nests. Everyone would take a wire and hook it up. That was it. No rhyme or reason, they just hooked the wires up, and it was a mess. The schools had metal grates for windows. Remember, it's a temperate area. The temperature does not vary much, so you don't need to have, tight houses for winter and open houses for summer. The schools had open windows, but they had these metal grates. You've seen them, they're framed, and they got the metal squiggly stuff on it. And what happens to them after a few years? Rust out badly. They look ugly. Well, our guys were taking those out and putting in the open decorative blocks. 2, our guys would go into the schools. They would take all the wiring out, up to the pole, run new wire, and then conduit everything inside. Bare wires all over the place. But they would conduit everything in these schools. We're talking long schools. And if they had a kitchen, they would rewire the kitchen. The one school you were at, their kitchen was a fireplace. The gentlemen were there redoing the bathrooms outside, digging new holes to move them. That's what they were like. But, the medical clinics, medical equipment from 30 years ago, but they would go in, take them down to the base and redo blocks and everything. But, this is what the centurion did. He built them a new synagogue. And, using soldier and local labor to build it. This is how he used the soldiers for good for the community. And that's what endeared him to the locals. He looked after them to make sure things were done right. What does the centurion say of himself? I'm not worthy.
To come into his house.
Correct, okay? First off, Gentiles did not come into Jewish houses. If you remember, where was Jesus tried? At Pilate's. In the portico. He was not brought into the palace. Why? Well, the Sanhedrin wouldn't bring him into the palace. Because it would make him unclean. Make him unclean. So there was this big deal about not entering a Jewish house, okay? So he was very careful about that. And he also says, I'm unworthy. Just because he was a centurion, he did not consider himself better than anyone else. And he thinks himself unworthy. What was so distinctive about the centurion's faith that it made Jesus marvel?
He was a Roman,
Not only that, but what?
a Gentile.
But he also recognizes the authority Jesus has. You know, I cry to him, a man set under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does that. Okay, a couple of different things here. Authority. Okay, when I became a pastor, what happened? What did they do? When you get a pastor, what's the first thing they do with them? No. Something first. Ordain him. Ordain him.
You're talking about somebody that
First coming into the ministry. Okay. The word ordain, of course, comes from the Latin ordinate. It means under orders. Okay. We become under orders of the church. Okay, you know, I have to pledge myself to this, and this. Okay, that's under orders. A Roman centurion did the same thing. When he's installed as a commander, he comes under orders of his higher command. He's recognizing in Jesus, that Jesus himself is under orders. He is there to do the orders of God. No other authority but God. So the centurion recognizes that Jesus is there under the authority of God. How does Jesus react? What does he say?
Thanks.
Yeah. Not even in Israel have I found such a faith. Now, what's the other time that Jesus is amazed? Mark 6:6.
lack of faith.
Lack of faith. I love the way how Erin put it. She said, sometimes you looked at the disciples and thought that they were Keystone Cops. That's how they acted. You know, a bunch of bumbling fools. They're not that bad, folks. On a scale of 1 to 10, where would you locate your faith? I said 7. I'm still getting there. It depends on the situation. Exactly. There are times when our faith is real strong. There's times when somebody's going, oh my God, help me. You know, yeah. Okay. Where's it being tested just now? Everywhere.
Yesterday was not a good day.
Okay?
I discovered my freezer had cut off and all my food was already
Oh.
melted.
Oh.
So,
Lots of cooking.
no, it was too late for that.
Oh.
And thank God for Joyce Ann. She helped me get it all cleaned up.
Yeah.
I have to get a new monitor for my computer and a couple other things. And I said, oh, Joyce Ann, the devil sure had a heyday yesterday.
That
I
I understand.
God, it was the devil doing all this. They're trying to make me give up, but I'm not giving up.
Miss Arlene, getting a new monitor, get a 32-inch one. Get a 32-inch one.
Oh, okay.
It's a lot easier to see.
Well, I have a 24
You want larger. You want larger, believe me. Okay. Yeah, no, I know what you mean. We came back from Kiwanis Club yesterday. I have to stop at True Home, pick up CPAP supplies. She's got to go to Walgreens to do some work on prescriptions. And of course, we go to True Home. It's after 1, but before 2, they're closed. Stupid lunch hours. Of course, we start going to Walgreens, my wife says, they don't open till 2. You're right. We turn around. Okay, finally we get it done. We got to go here, we got to go here, we got to go here. We finally got back to the church around 3 o'clock. It's like, don't win for losing. Can't get anything done. Okay, Nain is not far from the Old Testament town of Shunem. Read 2 Kings 4, 8 through 37, and describe what happened there. What happens in 2 Kings?
The son died and Elijah raised him from the dead.
Okay, yeah. What about that? What is the deal? Why is this son so important to the Shunammite woman?
He was her only son, and she was a widow.
Correct.
She didn't have anybody
Correct.
to take care of her.
And we've talked about that in Bible study on Sundays. No social programs, no social security, no old age pension, nothing. Widow has nothing. She can't even work. No one will hire her. Because she's nothing. Not only that, her chances of getting remarried are nil to none. She's a widow. They normally did not get remarried. She's having a young child. Okay? Apparently, the husband had no family, or no male heirs, or no male family members. So there's nothing there for her. She has the child. This child is going to be her security when he grows older. And he's dying. He's dying. What is she to do? Huh?
She sent for Elijah.
She sends for Elijah. Why?
She knows he can help.
Well, she's praying that he can help. Yeah. Okay. He's a prophet of God. He's the one that God has sent. Hopefully he can do something for her. So, okay. What happens in Luke? What's the story in Luke?
He healed the servant. He healed the servant.
Okay, well,
John is in prison.
no, he does not know. This isn't, we're before here. It's named, okay? As he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out. The only son of his mother, she was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said, do not weep. One of the few times where it said, he has compassion on her. What does that mean?
He felt sorry for her.
No, sorry. Not he feels sorry for her. His sorrow is hers. He takes on her sorrow. That's the difference between sympathy and compassion. Sympathy says, sorry your husband died. That's it. Compassion is you take on their sorrow. You feel it.
In the NIV, it says his heart went out to her.
Similar thing. His heart went out to her. He is with her. His feelings are with her. Okay. Back 80s and 90s, it was a fallout of what was called transactional analysis, a psychiatric field, in the late 70s. If you remember, the big phrase was, I feel for you. I feel for you. Someone would tell you the story of Roll. They'd say, I feel for you. What does that mean? It's like we have a school shooting and kids die. What's the first thing a politician says? My prayers are with them. Yeah, and what's that going to solve? It's a throwaway phrase that doesn't mean much. That's what sympathy is.
Really, all they're doing is saying something that you want to hear. That's all.
Yeah, that's about it.
Saying
That's about
something
it.
you wanna hear.
So here you've got Jesus who has compassion on the widow. What does he do?
he raises the boy.
Right. He tells the woman, do not weep, and tells the boy, get up. Rise. Wow. That's pretty good. Takes care of it right there.
Can't you just say that and him going, shut up, woman?
Well, we've already had that, remember?
Yeah.
The wine and water. He says, woman, what are you going to have? What do I have to do with you?
That's right.
Okay. Actually, Jesus was fairly respectful. So the front door. Oh, I know who that is. Okay. Okay. Now we have John comes in. We have messengers from John the Baptist. Okay, what does John do?
He sends his disciples to go ask if Jesus is the one.
Now, remember, John has had a ministry. Jesus is baptized by him. John has some disciples. Now, I saw something there when I was reading it. They called John rabbi. Okay. Which means he was a teacher, a religious teacher. So he had a number of disciples. It is very possible that John's disciples became Jesus' disciples. And that they end up following
Didn't
Jesus.
John basically send them to Jesus because he told them that I'm not even worthy?
We'll get there. We'll get there. We'll get there. Now, the interesting thing is, we hear this passage in Advent. This passage we hear in Advent. Are you the one, or is there another one to come? Or early Epiphany? You know, talking about Jesus, you know, if he's the one or not. Okay. So we have Jesus being, how would you put it? John sending his disciples to Jesus to question him and bring back to John a report. John 3. What does it say in John 3?
You yourself can testify that I said, I am not the Christ, but am sent ahead of him.
Okay. John is saying, I've been sent ahead by God to do these things. John 1.
John 1 said, John earlier had reminded his disciples, he must increase, but I must decrease.
Right, right. And I'm the one with the voice crying out in the wilderness. Okay, so all of these talk about how John said, I'm not the one, pointing to someone else who was to come, who turned out to be Jesus. Now, in here, I'm surprised he doesn't get into it very much. But what does Jesus say about himself?
To John's disciples,
Starts ringing in my ears. Okay, what does Jesus say to John's disciples?
he said, go back and tell John what you've seen and heard.
And actually, he's giving them a passage. It basically is a rephrasing of Isaiah. Now, go tell John what you've seen and heard. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me. So he's basically telling the disciples, go tell John the Baptist what all I've been doing. Why would he say that?
To show that he's the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophet.
Because that's what the Old Testament prophet said the king would do, the coming king. Right, right.
And it's, do you think John sent his disciples to Jesus to quiet his own doubts or to strengthen their faith in his Messiah?
I think was to strengthen their faith in the messiahship of Jesus.
Yeah, to reassure them that Jesus was actually the Messiah.
Yeah, it's interesting that John, who is a distant cousin or cousin of Jesus, wouldn't know who Jesus was. I'm sure John knew something was going on here. And John, getting premonitions that he was not going to live out, wanted to get his disciples ready to follow Jesus. Because he was the one. Yeah, he's the one. He's the one. Okay, how do you make sense of the paradox in verse 28? One, I don't think it's a paradox, but what is Jesus saying here?
Whoever humbles himself as a child.
Well, it takes on a child's humbleness. You know, not many kids, there's a few, not many kids consider themselves that great. I mean, kids will ask questions, and they'll ask any question in the world.
Well, kids do not recognize, they take everything literally.
Correct,
And
correct. They don't recognize abstract sayings or things.
And when we are told that our faith must be like that of a child, which means we take it literally, and that Jesus is our Savior,
Yeah.
and He died for us and forgives our sins and all.
Yeah, I don't think this passage is a paradox at all, because what Jesus is saying is that John's great. Okay, he was once chosen by God to do something very important and special. However, just because he was chosen by God to do something important and special doesn't make him greater than any other man. He was just chosen by God. It's something that I have to deal with as a pastor, especially with some other pastors. Yeah, I've been called by God to be a pastor, but that does not make me any better than anyone else. That does not make me more important than anyone else. Oh, power washer. Outside, Bill. So, I have to recognize that among myself. I'm no greater than anyone else. Jesus very often said, may the least among you be the greatest, and the greatest among you the least. Yeah. May the first be last, and the last be first. He's getting at the same thing there. Don't consider yourself any more special than anyone else, because you're not. But God will choose the truly humble to be the greatest. And that's what he did with John. So it's not a paradox. It's the way that God looks at it. And here's something else to consider. Thank you. God chose Moses. Well, let's go back to Abraham. God chose Abraham to be the father of nations. Where did Abraham rank in his family? No. His nephew Lot was almost his age, which indicated he had older brothers. Okay, let's go to Joseph. Where did Joseph rank in his family? Not quite. Benjamin was the youngest, but he was the second youngest. Still, he was one of the youngest ones in the family. That's one of the reasons his brothers got so upset with him. Who are you to tell us that we're going to bow down to you? You kid. You're the kid. Moses. Where did Moses rank in his family? He was the youngest. Aaron and Miriam were older than him. David. Where does David rank in his family? He's the youngest. He's back home taking care of the sheep because his big brothers are out fighting the war. Okay? So God turned when he chose leaders. He did not choose the oldest and the wisest. He chose the youngest. Solomon became king after David. Where did Solomon rank among the sons of David? He was the youngest. He was the youngest boy. Because who was his mother? Bathsheba. And Bathsheba's the last one he... Listen, the way Bathsheba got a hold of him, she wasn't going to let him get anyone else. Okay? Yeah.
Jesus is a classic one. He chose common old workmen instead of scholars and educated people.
Well, not just that. He chose common everyday people. He chose a tax collector. Okay? He didn't choose out of the hoi polloi. Yeah, he chose out of the youngest. Or at least, now the disciples were the oldest kids in the family. But yeah, they were not the high society. They were on the bottom. So, okay. What action distinguished the response of the sinful crowd from that of the religious experts?
The crowd had been baptized by John.
And what did they recognize? Well, Jesus was the chosen one of God. Okay? So, what did the Pharisees and Sadducees think? They were not impressed. They were not impressed. Why? Correct. Correct. They thought themselves very much more important. Remember, the Pharisees and Sadducees were two distinct groups. You had the priests, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees. Pharisees were not necessarily priests or Levites. The Sadducees the same way. But they made up two groups of what I call the landed gentry. These were the guys that owned properties. They owned businesses. They considered themselves the elite of the society. And again, it had to do with they had money, they had made it, and no one else had. Not only that, these guys very often, 70 of them served on the Sanhedrin, which was the grand court of Israel. Jews only. You know, we call it the Supreme Court, but it's too many numbers for Supreme Court. But typically they would make judgment on religious matters for Israel. So they considered themselves the in folks who knew what was what, and people needed to listen to them and pay attention to them. So it's interesting. What's the point of the children's song poem quoted by Jesus?
We played the flute for you if you did not dance. We sang a church and you did not cry. They weren't paying attention to what was happening around them.
Basically, from two study Bibles, people have rejected both John and Jesus, but for different reasons. Like children who refuse to play either a joyful game or a mournful one. They would not associate with John when he followed the strictest of rules, or with Jesus when he freely associated with all kinds of people. In other words, they stayed off on their own and didn't participate. I'm not going to play. The other one says, dismissively compares the criticism of Jesus' opponents with the childish chatter heard on the street corner. We played weak. Proverbial saying directed at those who criticize both John for being too stern and Jesus for being too easygoing. They rejected both the law's condemnation of their sin and the gospel's mercy. First one was from the Concordian Study Bible. The second was from the Lutheran Study Bible. But yeah, they're both getting at the same point. These people, these gentlemen, are placing themselves so far above, so far apart from everyone else, that it's basically, unless you play the game our way, we're not playing. We run into this very often when we in the church, talking about pastors, have theological disagreements. What will happen is both people will state their positions. They're really not that far apart. The problem is the one side is saying, unless you state it the way I state it, you're wrong. It's that simple. Unless you say it the way I say it, you're wrong. Bill, you run into this in aviation. There are certain ways to say things to the tower, or when you're communicating by radio. If you don't say it the right way, what happens?
Confusion.
And they stop listening to you. Yeah, confusion. It's like that plane crash in D.C. They're finding out a number of things. The first one is the altimeter in the helicopter may have been wrong. They thought they were right, but they may have been wrong. But some of the chatter between the tower and the helicopter wasn't being received properly, and they weren't saying the right things back. And once that happens, confusion, or fatal confusion. But yeah, the Pharisees are saying, you're not hanging around with the right people. We don't believe you. You're not doing the right rules. We don't believe you. John, who had the strictest of rules, wasn't doing it their way. So we're not going to listen to him. The disagreement we had last week with the disciples eating the grains. Well, they're breaking the Sabbath laws. Well, wait a minute. They're hungry. They need to eat. But the Sabbath laws. What's more important? Them eating or the Sabbath laws? The Sabbath laws? Come on. That doesn't make any sense. I can't remember the movie. I saw it many years ago. The Catholic Church had a very strict rule, and this all revolves around abortion and things like that. When a woman is in the hospital, she's dying, and the only way they can treat her is to take the baby early. The possibilities of the baby living are slim. But in order to save the mother, they have to take the baby. And the priest advises the family, no. Wait until the baby is ready to be born. So you're going to kill the mother to save the baby? Yeah. Why? The baby is more important than the mother. That's the way they look at it. Okay. You know, when you make up laws like this, and you forget all sense of ethics and Jesus and everything, you end up putting yourself in a bind very often. You know, it's like what you do. We talked about this on Sunday. You know, what do you do in the case of someone dying? Do you let them die, or do you start throwing medical stuff at them all over the place? That's a decision you got to make. You know, when someone takes someone home in hospice, what decision have they made?
Let them die, and people let them die.
Let them die naturally. Yeah. Let them die naturally. Okay. I can't remember the statistic, but over 50% of a person's medical expenses will be incurred in the last few years of their life. Traditionally. Because they start breaking down things out. I know in my father-in-law's case that happened. You know, he had heart issues that he had to be taken care of, and then he developed kidney issues, and finally they said palliative care. And he let him die at home in peace. So, not always easy. Okay, how would you characterize the lifestyle of Jesus as compared with that of John?
We're totally different.
Yep, how?
Well, John was lived in the desert and a Nazareth's life. No drinking, no, he ate locusts.
Locusts, wild honey. Okay, yeah, what we would call today a very ascetic life. Very simple life, garnered by rules. How did Jesus live his life?
Well, he interacted with, he had close friends and spent time in their homes and apparently drank wine and ate and.
Well, to put that into perspective, the drinking of wine, they didn't drink water that much. They drank wine. That was their beverage.
Well, in comparison, John did
No,
not.
no alcohol, no alcohol. But as I said, very ascetic life, very simple life, very simplified life. Jesus now, but remember, Jesus also said, foxes have holes and I have nowhere to lay my head. Jesus led a very itinerant life, but a very laid back life. The only place he was in a hurry to go to at any point was Jerusalem. Other than that, he went here, he went there. He went where he needed to be. He never heard him say, hey, let's rush off, we need to get here now. Matter of fact, when they say, Jesus, you need to hurry, Mary and Martha, Lazarus is very ill, Jesus said, it can wait, we'll get there. So, it's very interesting how Jesus led his life. I'm not going to say a leisurely life, because compared to today, that life is not leisure. But it was it was guided by God, not by man, what he did. Okay, next miracle. What unexpected event happened in Simon's dinner party?
Sinful woman shows up.
What do they mean by sinful woman?
Oh, I thought for sure she was supposed to be a prostitute or.
Most likely a woman of ill repute, exactly. Okay. It can't be an adulteress because they would have killed her. But yeah, a woman whose reputation is not good. Well-known reputation is not good. Because what's the first thing that happens after she starts anointing him?
They wanted to know if he knew what kind of a woman she was.
Yeah. A woman of bad character is anointing you. Doesn't that make you feel uncomfortable? They're trying to shame Jesus for letting her do this. What would be your reaction?
Truthfully, I'd probably back away.
Okay. Why?
Good question.
That's what we've been taught to do.
That's right.
Yeah, that's part of what we've been taught to do. Yeah. Okay.
You're expected to do whatever everybody else is expected to do.
Yeah. Try to remember this is the one.
And we're told not to associate with certain kinds of people because we might be tempted to go into that direction too.
Yeah. Now, if this man were a prophet, he would have known in what sort of woman this is who's touching him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus answering them said, Simon, I have something to say to you. Say it, teacher. So he goes into this parable. Okay? What does the parable talk about?
Two men who owed money, one a lot, one a little. And the money lender forgave both of them.
Who do you think is going to love him more?
One who owed him more.
You bet. Now, interestingly enough, he then basically upbraids Simon in front of everyone. Do you see this woman? I entered your house, you gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore, I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little. What's he saying? The greatest sin of all in that day was bad hospitality. The reason Sodom was destroyed was not because of quote, homosexuality. It was because of the non hospitality they showed the guests of Lot. Middle East hospitality is huge. Lot was supposed to protect his guests. That's why he did not allow them to be taken by the visitors at the door. He was there to protect them. Something like 3 days or something. Very big among the Middle Easterners. You know, my house is your house. You're welcome. Even in the James Bond movie that comes up when he's visiting an Arab sheik, you know, they're supposed to respect him and offer them comfort and stuff like that. So, you know, Jesus is visiting Simon's house. What hasn't Simon done?
He hadn't claimed his feet, he hadn't.
Well, he wouldn't, but he'd have a servant do it.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't,
Hospitable.
yeah.
Yeah, he didn't show Jesus the basics of hospitality. You know, go to Monday, Thursday. What does Jesus do with his disciples? Wash their feet. By the way, that was the lowest servant's job, to wash feet. Basically, because remember what they lived in. You walked with sandals or bare feet. And what was in the road? Everything. Everything. So it was the dirtiest job of all. And that was the lowest servant's job, was to wash the feet. And yet Simon didn't have anyone wash Jesus' feet. Okay, didn't anoint him on the head. This was something special. But you know, he didn't even offer him a kiss of hospitality. You go to the Middle East, what's the first thing they do? They bust you on the cheek. In Europe, they bust you on the cheek. You know, Americans are like, I don't do that. That's normal in Europe. Everyone does it. It's normal. And you know, in the Middle East, everyone does it. You know, there was a president that got into issues about that or something. That one of the sheiks went up and gave him a hug and kissed him like that. It's just normal behavior. But, you know, Simon did not even show that normal behavior. Why did Simon do that? What was the issue?
He thought it was beneath his
Yeah,
honor.
yes. He thought Jesus was beneath his honor. Okay?
Or he thought so much of himself that it was.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing. Be careful who you entertain, for you might be entertaining angels. Okay? So, yeah, he's pointing out to Simon that, you know, you didn't do much to me. Okay? And it shows. Now, what was the reason the woman was forgiven?
Her humility.
Your faith.
Her faith. Her faith. She trusted in Jesus. And this is where I think sometimes we emphasize the word faith without putting it with other words. Faith and trust go along. You can't have faith in Jesus unless you trust him. Believe or know that he was going to be there for you. And that's what this woman did. Bill.
Back to shoes, wash your feet.
Yeah.
It's not very common, but it does happen. Some people won't let you in your house unless you take your shoes off.
The house I go to in Hamburg to do services in Sunday nights, we have to take the shoes off at the door. My in-laws were like that for the longest time. And Japan, they have slippers by the door. Canada, my first church, we would go to visit someone. They had a newer house. The first thing you did was you took off your shoes by the door and put on slippers. Always.
Like that. Beluga,
Yes, European.
they wear slippers in the house.
Yeah, European. For a couple of reasons. First off, you don't bring that dirt into the house. It keeps the house cleaner. Okay? Floors. Mostly in Europe, it's hardwood floors or marble. My uncle's house, my cousin's house, they built a house onto the back of the restaurant area. And it's got marble floors, top and bottom. You know, we don't do marble floors. Why? Why don't we do marble floors?
Expense.
Expense. Plus, Marble is difficult to maintain. It's soft. It may not look it. It's soft. It's soft. And you have to seal it. You have to be careful what you do on it. That's why it's not ranked highly as a counter material because it is so soft. Most of what you see in your houses is not real marble. It's fake marble because real marble is too soft. You know, what is it? David, Michelangelo's David, Lincoln in the Lincoln Memorial. Those are all made of marble, and they gouge very easily. So, you know, just one of those things. You don't wear that stuff inside because it ruins the floors. Choose it. And hardwood floors too. Got a lot of hardwood floors. When we were in Germany, the hotels, some of the hotels were hardwood paneling and windows. No aluminum windows there or vinyl, hardwood. But they got a lot of hardwood. And that's just the norm. Greece, you go into the monasteries. The outside are block, but the inside has all sorts of wood paneling on it. Beautiful wood paneling. Those things are gorgeous on the inside, but it's wood. You know, no artificial things there because you know the floors, by the way, are rock. Dolomite, limestone, they're rock. They're hard. They're also not heated. Cold. By the way, when you go into the cathedrals in Europe, those are not heated or cooled. They're not. So in winter, you bring your jacket with you because you need something to keep you warm. Just normal. So compare this woman to Simon. What's the difference?
She was doing the hospitable thing by washing his feet with her, and with her tears, she didn't have water any other way, apparently. And no towel, so she used her hair to dry them.
She was more humble.
Very humble. Very humble. She didn't think highly of it. That's why she cleaned his feet with her hair. She was not above using her hair. And you know, typically women wore their hair long back then. But
Well, they
you know,
had to, it's the only towel they had.
what?
It's the only towel they had.
Actually, no. Very often the men ran around with 2 or 3 gowns around their waist, and one of them was like a towel or an apron. I mean, women had aprons back then, but they didn't have modern undergarments, but they would wear 2 or 3 layers of clothing. If you remember, I'm thinking, oh gosh, what was it? One of the disciples, Jesus, it says he lifted up his tunic and put it into his belt. He wasn't barelegged, he still had another gown underneath that. But he was lifting up the outside tunic so it would not get dirty. And, workers did the same thing. They would have aprons or stuff like that. We often hear them talking about taking off the outer garment as they would run into the water. When they went to these mikvahs, they typically would go into the mikvah, take off the dirty clothes, and have a set of clean clothes as they got up out of the bath to put on. So that as they went to prayer in that, they were clean not only bodily-wise, but also garment-wise. And by the way, I've been seeing a lot of articles lately. They found a Roman bath in England going back to the 1st century. The Romans, by the way, Roman bathhouses were unique and very complicated. They had one area, a privy area, and by the men's, women's, totally separate, not even close to each other. But the men's bath would have a privy. They had seats that you would sit on, and they would have running water in a channel underneath. and a marble or a limestone seat up top that would have a hole in it that you would sit on. And then they had sticks with sponges. You would put it in the water, and that's what you clean yourself with. Very good privy areas had a stage area where a band would play. I kid you not. We saw this in Israel. They then had the bath area where would have areas where they would seat, like a Turkish bath and that. Also a deep area where you would get in the water. And underneath, again, they would have arranged a whole bunch of pots with fire in it to heat up the water. And they had tanks where the water would, where they would heat the water. And these were maintained by servants so that they would get a hot bath. I mean, the Romans loved their baths. Now, what was so wrong about the Roman baths for the Jews? They did it like they did their sports. Nude. Okay, that was not unusual. So, they would get in there with each other. And in the Jewish culture, that was very immodest. What was the worst thing they did to Jesus when they put him on the cross? Stripped him. He was hanging up there butt naked. And that was very humbling to be hung up there butt naked. Because, as I said, typically in Jewish society, you covered yourself. Even if it was a simple tunic, you covered yourself. That was considered the cultural norm. Only at home would you get naked. That was it. Or in the mikvah. Those were the only places. And of course, the mikvah was designed that no one saw you. You went in by yourself and came out by yourself. So, just kind of unique. So this woman humbles herself to wash Jesus, his feet, anoint someone on his head with oil. When else does that happen? Right before crucifixion. Can't remember exactly. There's traditions that holds it's either one of Mary and Martha or it's Mary Magdalene. Yeah, we say Mary Magdalene. It's Mary of Magdala. Okay, she came from the area of Magdala, and she is a wealthy woman. She bankrolls Jesus' ministry for a little while. That's what we believe, because she was a wealthy woman. Magdala is up by Tiberias, up off the Sea of Galilee. Most of Jesus' followers were Galilean. But they anoint Jesus with nard oil. Nard is a very expensive oil. And Judas starts making a comment. What's the comment? Yeah. We could have sold it.
Give it to the poor.
Give it to the poor. Yeah, right. Just more to embezzle. But yeah, we could have sold it. What's Jesus' comment to that?
You'll always have the poor with you.
The poor you will always have with you, but I will not be. Now, to keep politicians from misquoting that one all the time, it's taken from the Old Testament. He paraphrases something from the Old Testament. The poor you will always have with you. But what goes with that?
You need to do something about it.
Yeah. Let me get the exact quote. Deuteronomy. For there will always be poor people in the land. Therefore I command you, you must open your hand to your brother and to the poor and needy in your land. That turns what most politicians say on its head. Why do they always say that? Well, no, this is usually said when they're talking about not giving welfare to the poor. Well, the poor you always have with you. It's like nothing we will do will change this. No kidding. What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to be a helping hand. Okay. Yeah, this is from AI, by the way. The verse is part of a larger section in Deuteronomy that deals with social justice and treatment of the poor and vulnerable. God acknowledges the reality of poverty, but does not see it as a reason for indifference. Instead, he commands the Israelites to be compassionate and generous towards the poor. Jesus also uses a similar phrase in the gospel. Jesus' statement while referencing the Deuteronomy passage is also meant to highlight the importance of compassion and service to others, especially the poor. However, the phrase is not intended to be a justification for ignoring the poor or for not working to alleviate poverty. Instead, it emphasizes the ongoing need for compassion and action. Okay, so yeah. So, Jesus is paraphrasing what it says there, but he also brings in the fact that he will not be with them for very long. Why is she anointing him? In preparation for his burial. A burial practice for a century. When someone died, the first thing they did after they were declared dead, they would go in and ritually wash them. In many hospitals, especially ones with a large Jewish population, when someone dies Jewish, they notify the family. And one of the first things they do is they take off all the equipment and leave the body laying there. And then a group of people will come in who do this for a living and will ritually wash the body. The next thing they do is they will take the body and put it in a shroud. White muslin cloth for linen. Okay, no fancy suits or anything like that. White cloth. The body will then be transported by the funeral home to the funeral home. It will not be embalmed. It was put into a casket, usually natural materials, not metal, and taken to the Jewish cemetery. There it will be buried. Done. Within 24 hours. Okay? Many people think that the embalming is a state requirement. No. If you are going to be buried within 24 hours, no viewing, no embalming needed. I had a gentleman die who was going to be cremated. They took 2 days. I was down there. We did a service in view of the body, and they then cremated him. But he was not viewed. He was covered. Had to be covered. Okay. My dad died in Georgia. Because he was being transported over state lines, he had to be embalmed. That is a hard and fast rule. Transport a body over state lines, it gets embalmed. We had a viewing. My mom rented a casket. He had a viewing. And then after the viewing, he was taken to the crematorium and cremated. And my mom got the ashes 2 days later. So, and that's how it works. If you've ever gone or watched these funerals for Muslims overseas, very similar practices. The body's ritually washed, put into a shroud, put into a casket, taken and buried. That's simple. And typically they will bury them in a Jewish cemetery because they don't require a vault. Okay. And by the way, again, state law does not require a vault. It's the cemetery that requires a vault. Why?
Upkeep or.
Yep, maintenance of the cemetery. Typically, when you see someone who's been freshly buried, there's a mound over the grave. Why? It's going to settle. It's going to settle. Yeah. It's going to settle. My wife's dad was buried before they required vaults. And when her and I met and started going out, she took me out to her dad's grave. It's a family thing. And we got out there. It was like that. They had to, take the sod off the top, fill it with gravel, and then refill it and cover it. So they lost the marker at that point. there was a marker in the middle of the grave. They haven't done it since. So, I'll tell you a funny one about that. When I was in Wisconsin, the one church I was at had a big cemetery. We had 12 acres. Big cemetery, parsonage, barn for storage, garage underneath it, and then the church, built on a slope. Had one of my members pass away, we did the funeral, and he was buried in the cemetery. And the cemetery was not flat, it kind of tilted down and over. It had been a wet day, lightly raining and that when we did the committal. And my kids got home from school and, they played outside, the sun came out, everything started drying up. And the kids go outside and they came in, Daddy, there's a coffin floating in the graveyard. Huh? What had happened was that our guy that opened and closed the graves was a bus driver. And he would dig the grave before his bus run in the morning, and then close it after his bus run in the afternoon. So it was like 4 o'clock, because the reason he was our grave digger was he had a backhoe. He did backhoe work. So he hadn't covered it yet. And what had happened was the water had started seeping into the grave. They did. You can't stop it. And the vault is so airtight that it started floating in the water. And floated all the way to the top. So I had to call the sexton and tell him, you need to pump it out. So he pumped it out and the guy filled it with dirt. So keep it from filling back in again. But that was, it was one of those funny things that happened. I've heard about funeral directors falling in to graves, that they get close to the sides and it's wet. As the side wilts. I don't know if you don't see it, but very often when they prepare the grave site for burial, the grave is dug, they then put a wooden frame around the top of it, and then put the casket device on top of that wooden frame, so that they can lower the casket into it. They've got motorized ones, they've got manual ones, it doesn't really matter. But if the field director, sometimes they're there when they're digging it, if it gets too close before they put that wooden frame around it, right in. Not good on the suit. It's quite dirty. So that's it. Next week is Bible study and ladies' meeting.
John, take care. Really,
Old age just don't agree.
I don't agree with anybody.
Aaron, would you wear that colored shirt so the pollen wouldn't show up on?
I want to, I like the color of it. That's why I bought it.
Started black before we did.
So no more crowd on Friday?
Yes, sir. You available?
Yep.
Good.
At least I think I am.
The refurbished computer, you gonna have a chance to look at that?
We'll try.
The only problem that I have is I ordered the two things, but I have nothing that says I ordered.
Well, we'll take a look. It usually goes to your email. It tells you where to go to. Okay.
Ms. Arlene, I hope you have a good day.
Thank you.
So you're gonna get yourself a new freezer?
If I get one, it'll be a small one.
Like a 5 or 7? Yeah. Yeah, we had a 7, and between Susan, my wife and I, you know, we buy meats when they're on sale, so we stick them in there. Our freezers are not bare, but low right now. Some of the stuff from inside needs to be taken outside, because they're open. Like, I'll buy pork butts, ribs, and stuff like that, stick in the freezer.
Well, I have no.
No, you don't, you're just cooking for yourself.
On myself. And to top it all off, the battery in my watch died.
Oh, yeah, I know. They do that at the worst times. They do that at the worst times possible. You know, why can't you do that on my schedule, not yours?
Thank you for my card.
You're welcome. Hope you have a wonderful day.
And we're gonna go eat Chinese.
Are you?
Chef Lee? Haven't had Chinese for a little while. When I first got on the Ozempic, I had problems. Since then, it seems to have calmed down, and I'm not getting as many issues. So we need to try it again.
Well, my sister, she went on Ozempic back last year sometime, but, she's on something else now.
There's 3 different ones.
The doctor gave her one thing, she was supposed to give her shots herself, and he showed her how to get so much in the thing. She went home and she found it took a couple of weeks to get the insurance and all to do. She took the whole bottle. So he went and changed it to, it's like an EpiPen now.
Well, the Ozempic comes in something like that. It comes with its own pen needles, but you screw them on the end,
Oh, well, yeah, this
and then
was,
there's a dial up top where you dial in what you're supposed to take. See, Donna has that with her Soliqua. Her methotrexate, though, is a straight syringe. So we have to buy syringes, and she pulls out what she's supposed to use and then injects herself.
Donna wasn't quite up.
Yeah, I know. It takes a little bit. Most of these, they've gotten a lot smarter. I'm not going to say they're foolproof, but as long as you know what you're doing, you can do it real easily.
Yeah, well, I knew when we were with her at the doctor when he was showing her how to do all this. I thought she was gonna be able to do that.
Yeah.
And she wasn't.
Nope.
See ya.
Take care.
At least Sunday, maybe Saturday, out at the reader.
Oh.
Try to go to that.
Well,
You need to call Siri, Donna?
I would love to go,
Give me a minute.
and, I'll just have to see if Joyce Sanders wanted to go. If she does, I thought I'd talk to Pat.
It's supposed to be raining sometime on Saturday, so,
Supposed to have sort of bad Saturday and Sunday, you know.
Okay.
I think Sunday's gonna be worse than Saturday. All next week, we got, rain for all next week.
We need rain to
Yeah.
cut down on the fires. Yeah.
Don't know if we need it all week, though.
Yeah, that's true. Take care.
All right.
Are you ready? Yes, ma'am.
Don's ready.
I'm talking to Pat.
Okay, I'll let him know.
Rose is open today.
Okay, bye-bye.
Rose is open today.
She'll be back shortly. She's a virgin.
Show
Super.
video of them
She'll be
walking
back
around
here.
showing what all they have.
Left again, I tell you.
I know.
Reminds me of And as Trey said, prices are pretty good too.
Well, yeah, it's a discount, like Ross's.
It reminds me of Giant Tiger, of
Okay.
Mom's.
Well, we have to get there sometime then.
And you know that big wall clock you bought? They've got them there too.
Yeah, that's okay.
He bought this big clock that,
Not that big, dear, it's only about this big,
No,
okay?
it's huge.
It's big.
I have no idea where we're gonna put it.
Oh, you'll find a place.
I told him we didn't need a clock that big. Here, we probably need one.
Use one in the bedroom, because when we don't have glasses on, we can see it.
See you on Saturday.
Okay.
Everything okay?
Yeah.
Oh, is that Siri?
Well, I had a call Siri.
Oh.
I forgot.
We're going over the service. She said, I don't want to do this again. She's afraid she's gonna mess up, and she has a couple of questions, so I wanna go over a couple of things with you.
Okay. Oh,
What'd you do?
some unresolved stuff.
Oh.
Yep.